Hi friends, welcome back to Nevada Friends of Midwives YouTube channel. I'm excited because today we're going to be interviewing Lindy, who is a midwife who's had the advantage of working in Nevada as an unlicensed midwife and then moving to a state where they do license midwives. So she can give us a really valuable perspective on the differences and the impact that that's had on her as a professional and on her clients. So before we do that though, I wanted to take a minute and kind of explain a few things so that this conversation makes more sense as we move forward. And the main thing that I want to talk about is the difference between a certification and a license. A certification is a piece of paper that an organization or maybe even just an individual issues to another person to say, this person has completed these skills and has shown that they know how to do these things, or has read these books or attended these webinars, or whatever the qualifications may be. They completed it. I will vouch for them. The difference between that piece of paper, that certification, and a license is the state and the police. So in states where certain industries are licensed, what that means is not only does this person have to demonstrate that they have a certain kind of certification or otherwise demonstrate that they have a certain set of skills, now the state owns that and they say, you cannot practice without our blessing. We now own the definition of this industry and you are not allowed to practice outside certain bounds. Usually what a state will do is they will look around to see what the standard is, what's the certification that most people get, and they'll say, okay, you have to have that. In addition to the certification, you need to pay us X amount of money so that we can regulate you and keep track of you and possibly punish you if you don't do things the way that we say that you're allowed to do them. The argument for licensure, of course, is that this creates a sense of security for a consumer. They think if this professional is giving me this service and something goes wrong, then I can go to the state and the police and use the power of the state to make that person give me some kind of recompense, be it money or the satisfaction of seeing them in jail or whatever. The idea is that this is going to create a higher sense of accountability amongst professionals to do a better job, be safer, follow the rules more closely. They are not necessarily following the dictates of their conscience. They're asking themselves, how can I stay out of trouble? And that will almost always be a higher priority to a person who has spent a great deal of time and money and energy to obtain their certifications and then their license, unfortunately, then it will be to honor the relationship that they have with their client. There is no industry that demonstrates this more clearly than midwifery, and this is what I want to talk about today. The certification that most midwives will obtain in states where they then need to become licensed is called the CPM, the Certified Professional Midwife. And there are a number of certified professional midwives in Nevada, and I'd say it's maybe about 50-50 midwives who have taken the time to do the certification and midwives who have gone other educational pathways in order to present themselves in a satisfactory way to their client, which is, in the end, the only person who matters, right? So in order to obtain your CPM, your Certified Professional Midwife status, the organization that you're going to answer to is called NARM, the North American Registry of Midwives. And the nice thing about this certification is that it can also give kind of a framework for those who are interested in following a set of guidelines to achieve an educational goal and a certain skill set, but not necessarily turn it into anybody, to not then take that to an organization like NARM to be on their registry, to have some oversight, to be on a list, but they still can go to clients and say, I completed this. And there are a number of midwives who have chosen either option. Either you've worked with an apprentice for a certain amount of time, read a certain set of books, attended a certain number of webinars, which is also a requirement for CPM, a handful of, I'm sorry, not webinars, hand-on workshops. And the person who then decides whether or not this is satisfactory is the client, is the mom. And in this day and age with Google, with the ability to reach out to hundreds of people who have had your midwife attend her birth, Google offers us just a really great tool, right? The internet. So in Nevada, what's on the table now is some legislation that is practically identical to what it was 2 years ago that we shot down, that would require all CPMs to become licensed. There's about 60 midwives practicing in the state of Nevada that we have been able to contact and speak with. Some are certified nurse midwives, which means that they have obtained a nursing degree and then some additional midwifery training, and they are licensed and regulated under the Board of Nursing. There's a significant number of midwives who've taken other educational pathways, some that are very, very similar to what the CPMs have done, some that are a little bit different. And then there's a good handful of certified professional midwives. So we have the advantage of having lots of different kinds of midwives who come from different backgrounds and different skill sets, to be able, so that a mother has lots and lots of options to choose from. And of course, if she wants state regulation in her birth, she has the option of going to a certified nurse midwife or an OB, or maybe a nurse practitioner. We really have a lot of options in Nevada, which is a wonderful thing. The thing that makes Nevada so beautiful and wonderful is that we have the option of autonomous birth choices. Midwives who do not answer to anybody but their peers, other midwives, the birthing community, and their client. I hope this gives you some clarity as we move forward into our interview with Lindy, so that you can understand the differences between licensure and certification. Here's the interview. Here we are with Lindy. Thank you for joining us and taking time out of your day to talk about our issues over here. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself and talk about your years in Nevada and what it's like for you now?
Sure. My name's Lindy Casey. I was a midwife starting in 1981 until a couple years ago. And for the majority of that time, I was in Nevada working. I lived in Boulder City, but I worked primarily in Las Vegas and in the surrounding area. And then I moved to Wisconsin. So in Nevada, it was a paradise for midwives, and it was truly a joy. And in Wisconsin, it was not that way.
Okay, so you've had enough time to kind of acclimate to the new environment and really get a feel for the way that licensure impacts midwives and women.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I first got there, they did not have licensure. It was pretty much like it is in Nevada. And I really didn't think I was even going to practice. I thought I was just done with midwifery. Because of the weather issues there, I didn't really want to be driving on those roads in the wintertime.
Right, right.
However, when licensure passed, I thought, well, this is the logical next step. And even if I never use it, I'm going to get licensed. And so it was relatively easy. I had my CPM credentials since about 1998 or 99. And so all it involved was just submitting proof that I was a CPM and paying a fee, and I was licensed.
Were people happy about licensure? Were there people who were fighting it? Were there people who were pushing it?
The midwives I did talk to, they were thrilled about it. And I could understand that. They were really excited to have what they perceived as recognition of their hard work, recognition of their knowledge. And they really believed that this would make it easier for them to interface with the medical community.
Right.
And I don't know that I bought into any of that. I just thought it was pretty neat to have another thing to hang on the wall, so what? But it didn't take very long till there was fighting and anger expressed in those Facebook groups. And the anger and fighting seemed to be not at their license, but at each other. They just
Oh.
really just were going at it. One of the
Mm.
things about the Wisconsin law, it requires so that Wisconsin, the licensing division doesn't have to police the midwives. The midwives are supposed to police themselves. So these
Mm-hmm.
midwives created an organization that they call the Guild of Midwives or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never a member of it. I don't like groups, but that group decided that they would follow those rules and they would, kind of come down as the police of the midwives. And so if a midwife did something they thought that she shouldn't do, they brought it up, and they brought it up in the ways that mean girls do. And so it was a really unpleasant environment. And although nobody ever attacked me, they might have done it behind closed doors, but they never did it to my face. It was really unpleasant. And I just
Mm-hmm.
didn't like it very much at all. Being a midwife where I was virtually, well, not virtual. I mean, I truly was isolated. I was completely isolated by distance, by weather, by everything. I was isolated where I was in northern Wisconsin. I didn't have somebody to call and say, come and relieve me. I'm exhausted. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have somebody to say, come to this birth with me. I think it's going to be tough. I was on my own and flying by the seat of my pants. And so I just had quit interacting with them. But stuff filtered through. And there was a midwife in southern Wisconsin who had an Amish birth center, and they just decided I don't know whether they were jealous or what, but they just really got on her. And one of the things that had happened was a doctor had given her direction to give a medication to one of the patients. It was his patient, but she was taking care of that woman to have her baby at her birth clinic. And those midwives, they just went berserk. They just said, you can't do that. We're going to sanction you. You can't deliver babies anymore unless one of us is with you.
Mm.
And so, because I was a licensed midwife, so I said, well, I'll come and stay with you and oversee it, even though I said it was stupid. And I told it time and time again, this is the stupidest thing I've ever done, because you don't need anybody to oversee you. It's none of their business. And the doctor told you to give the medication. It was just really awful. And as time went on, I was hired, probably because of that particular situation. I was hired by different midwives around the state who had lawsuits. And the lawsuits were brought not by the state and not by a parent, but by the other midwives.
Mm.
In one case, it was, I can't talk too in depth about these cases, but in one case, they said that the midwife should have uh, referred the woman to a physician to get medication for what sounded like a very mild UTI. And the
Mm.
woman had opted to treat it naturally, and which is her prerogative. Um, and another case was they said that somebody had labored too long, and I can't remember the other one's detail. But that really was an eye opener. That those midwives had the power to screw up your life to that degree. And those midwives, they lost their birth. One of them lost the birth center. One of them lost, well, none of them are midwives anymore. They lost money because they still had to defend these lawsuits. So I was a expert witness for them and went over all their case files. And the one thing I learned, and I am going to stick by this, is don't document anything. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. Don't document it. Put it in secret files under your bed if you have to, but don't have it in an official document, because if you do, someone can pick that apart. And even if there's nothing wrong with it, it's just like if the police question you, anything you say can and will be used against you. Anything you write down can and will be used against you, and you have to defend it. And it's expensive to defend yourself. So
Uh-huh.
I changed the way I documented stuff, and I started using phrases of my own imagination to explain things. And so then that was the pressure that I was under I had the weather, I had the isolation, I had no help. And then I really felt I was in a hostile environment because the midwives weren't my friends. I called up a midwife one time after a difficult birth, and she lived some distance away, but I had met her at a neonatal resuscitation class. And I thought, oh, she seemed really nice. So I called her up and just asked if I could talk to her about this birth and was telling her about it. And she said, oh, I don't think you should tell anybody about that.
How unfortunate.
And so I ultimately made the decision in 2020 to just not do it anymore, to just
Mm.
not. And so I'm just not. It's possible that if I was still, hadn't given up my CPM, if I still had it, I might be practicing in Missouri. But I'm really kind of glad I'm not, because it's the same thing here, even though their licensing system in Missouri is very different from Wisconsin's. It requires you to have a CPM. You don't have to go through any formal thing and you don't have to pay a fee. But if you're caught delivering a baby without a CPM, you could get in trouble. I don't know what the fine or the trouble would be, but the midwives it's the same thing, this territorial thing. And the people who will turn you in are not your clients. They're the other midwives. The midwives who jump through the hoops, they're the ones who will turn you in.
It's
So
so unfortunate because that support of your peers is so crucial to your sanity and to your practice. So licensure became available shortly after you moved there. And
yes,
then how long did it take before things really began to fall apart to where all the lawsuits were coming up and the relationships were deteriorating?
it took a while for the lawsuits to come up. It was probably in 2015, 2016 that I went through a spate of those, being the expert witness of those lawsuits. But even before that, one of the things that I've heard midwives say, and one of the things those midwives said in that Facebook group, was that they believed that being licensed would make them a more legitimate care provider in the eyes of the medical community, and that going into a
Right.
hospital with a client would be easier, that making a transfer would be easier. And I did not see that at all. After experiencing, no, sure, in Nevada, there were a few doctors that were kind of jerks, but
Mhm.
mostly nobody cares. Nobody even really
Right.
cares. They're
Right.
just doing their job and it's whatever. But there, because the birth rates are so low in Wisconsin, man, they don't want to give one of them up. And you walk in with a
Mhm.
lady and they are on you. I've been screamed at by doctors in front of my clients for absolutely nothing. One time, this was actually my granddaughter was having her baby. She was towards the end of her pregnancy and she had been out at a county fair and her water broke. And she called me up and I was out. And so I drove to where she was. And the distances are so great, I couldn't, I was not going to take the time to backtrack and go back to my house to get her file and go and find her. So I got to
Right.
her house. I said, you have to go to the hospital. She was too early to have a home birth. We went to the hospital and the doctor screamed at me for not having her file with me.
Mhm.
Um, I had one lady, her situation, she ended up having to be transferred and it was a good call. And we got to the hospital and they gave her, it was like a walk of shame. They wheeled her down. She told me about this. I was not allowed to go with her. They wheeled her down a hallway and people came out of the rooms, the staff, and crossed their arms and stared as she was wheeled down this hallway. Um, one time I was sitting in a waiting room and the receptionist behind the counter, I overheard her telling another client that I had called her a dirty hippie, which of course is ridiculous. It's just bizarre stuff like that. Some of
Mhm.
that is because it's a rural area and people have a different mindset, but some of it also is because you do not gain legitimacy by having a piece of paper. That is
Correct.
not how that happens. And you will never be part of that club. Not that I ever wanted to be part of that club, but certainly I had high hopes that I would be able to interface with the medical community easier being a licensed midwife. Even just getting blood work done, anything. It did not make any difference at all. And I had kind of, I had a little bit of experience with the birthing community before I got licensed, because my oldest daughter was having a baby there, and I was coming back and forth from Nevada to Wisconsin, and delivered that baby. And so I knew a little bit about how you interact with the medical community there, because I was a midwife. I was coming into Wisconsin to deliver my grandchild, and I saw how they treated me. And I think it was worse after I got licensed. I really think it was worse. I couldn't even get an oxygen tank filled. So there were no advantages to birthing mothers. There were none. There was absolutely none. They couldn't make a transfer to see a physician or a hospital easier. They would get harassed. I don't think there were any advantages. The cost for having a home birth at the time I left was, I think, $3,000. That was kind of the going rate for the midwives in the northern half of the state, which is significant for somebody who doesn't have much money. You could get, I don't even know what it's called, just registered to be able to accept Medicaid. But the Medicaid paid $700.
Yeah.
That was it. $700. So I didn't want to take Medicaid patients. For those women, they couldn't understand it. To them, it'll pay a doctor, it'll pay you. What's the difference? But there is a difference. If you devote all the hours that midwives devote to taking care of a client, and all the hours in one person's show at a birth, and then you get, it equates to less than minimum wage.
Right. Were you required to take Medicaid patients?
No.
You had the choice to opt out.
Yeah. It's quite a process to be able to be approved to accept Medicaid. Yeah, so I did it. I was approved, but I just decided I wasn't going to do it. I just was not going to accept Medicaid. And one of the things I believe I was told this, I don't know if this is true, was that if you were registered to accept Medicaid, you're accepted to accept Medicaid, you had to accept Medicaid. And so I didn't want to do that. So I just got myself out of that.
Do you think that licensure made birth safer for women?
No, I really believe that one of the things that the culture of licensure does is it shifts your focus from keeping, not completely, obviously we still have a heart and we have brains and everything else, but it's someplace back in our animal brains, it shifts the focus from taking care of this person and making sure they're safe and they get what they want and they have a nice birth, to at least some portion of that, I must be careful that I don't risk my license.
Right.
And so you are making choices. You're considering what they need, but you're still making choices based on, your water's been broken too long, you got to go to the doctor. You can't stay home. If there were any safety measures that would be gained through licensure, I can't even imagine what they'd be, because it doesn't make a safer midwife. Those midwives, some of them had virtually no experience, and their experience was BS anyway. The first thing that happens when a new market opens is that somebody goes in to take advantage of that market, make some money off it. And so this new market was training midwives. We've got a new license. Next part, training the midwives. They have put out so many midwives that overall, I think if you took the whole state as a whole, it's like 3 births per midwife per year. Very minimal training, and their training was more medicalized. The preceptorship pretty much was, they were the assistant to the midwife, and they really didn't get to do anything at all. So then as soon as they got their CPM, they were out on the streets with their brand new license, their brand new CPM, out on the streets trying to hustle up business in a place that doesn't have enough births for all these midwives that they've produced. And they weren't safe. They weren't safe because it takes more than just knowledge in your brain. It takes time to absorb that knowledge. And it takes
Yeah.
lots of experiences to know how to apply the knowledge that you've absorbed. And they
Mm-hmm.
just didn't have that.
And it takes and a really important element of, like you were saying, being able to call somebody or sit down with them after the birth and kind of defrag and see what their perspective was,
Yeah.
especially if it was a difficult birth. Doing that and processing that, as soon as possible after the birth is super, super important. But if you are afraid of what that person is going to think, um,
Right. Or you're
of
afraid
you,
you if you lose your license after you just spent all this money going through an educational process. Yeah.
yeah, it's really unfortunate. So, what are some of the restrictions that were placed on what midwives were allowed or not allowed to do at a birth?
Compared to a lot of states, I think that was actually pretty liberal. If you had twins, you could still take care of twins, but you had to consult with a physician. Well, obviously, if you consult with a physician or the client consults with a physician, they're going to be told you're insane. So, you pretty much knew that if you had a twin situation, those people would be having a hospital birth because that's what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
If they went past 41 weeks, I think it was, you had to consult with a physician. Anytime you had to interact with a physician, it was always unpleasant. And so you wanted to avoid that at all
Mm-hmm.
costs. Consulting with a physician implies they have a power to then
Yeah,
say, no, you can't do this. So
correct.
it wasn't too restrictive as far as that goes, other than saying you have to consult with a physician. You had to provide the same services and tests as uh, traditional medical care would
Mm-hmm.
provide for that same lady. So in my case, that was really difficult because I couldn't even get a lab to have an agreement with a lab to be able to send people for it. So I had to use one of those where anybody can walk into the lab and get a lab test done. Sometimes I would send them to a friendly doctor that they had and act like they were going to have their baby with that doctor. I had
Yeah.
lots of clients that did that. They would go into their doctor and act like they were going to have their baby with that doctor.
And then
Just
just
didn't.
not show up.
Yeah, yeah, just fired them.
So
But didn't.
there's a couple of things that concern me about having to consult with a doctor. One is, and it's in the back of my mind, so I'm sure it was in the back of the mind of all these mothers. What happens if I ignore the recommendation of the doctor, say I'm having twins and I really, really want to stay home? Um, is that mom then kind of under scrutiny as being a neglectful parent because she ignored the advice of the physician? Or were you even allowed to move forward? Say the physician said, no, twins is a bad idea, and you went ahead and did it. What would be the ramifications of that for you and the mom?
I don't know because I was never in that position, and I
Mm,
don't know any midwife who was in that position
mhm.
because I think that they just played the part they had been given, and if they sent somebody to a doctor, they figured that client was going to go to a doctor then. And I don't think that ever, to my knowledge, in my experience, I never saw that come up because it just didn't come up. I knew that if I sent a lady in to see a doctor, that she would probably transfer to that doctor. That
Yeah.
their manipulation is a is very subtle, and medical manipulation. And I think that I've seen it in action. You've probably seen it in action. A doctor says, uh, "If this was my wife, I'd I'd have her signed up for the cesarean."
Right,
Or,
right.
you know, you love your baby, don't you? Don't you want your baby to be safe?
Do you want your baby to die?
Exactly. There was one time I had a lady, by her date, she was overdue, sent her in because I had to, and I figured that was that, and kind of just wrote her off as being a hospital or home birth. And she was just remarkable. I don't know what she said to him, but she, I think they expected her to come back when she went into labor, but she did not, and she did not call me until she was pushing.
Mm.
And I got there too late. Her husband caught the baby, so that was kind of cool because they lived out in the woods. But you know, it was just very unpleasant. It was a very unpleasant experience. It was very lonely, um, pitting the midwives against one another. You know, actually having it in the rules that you have to turn in a midwife who's not licensed. You have to turn in a
Yeah.
midwife if you think she does something wrong. That that is what it was. It was just, it was really awful. It was really awful.
That sounds really awful. And the people who end up paying the most are the moms.
I got a call the other day from someone up there, some lady, and she said she needed a midwife. There were no midwives around anymore. Well, of course not, because it's not sustainable. And she, you know, asked me some questions, and I suggested to her, well, you could either, you know, go to the hospital or you could have an unassisted birth. And she said, believe me, we're thinking about that. And here's the issue. If you are committed to having an unassisted birth and you really believe in it, more power to you. But if you're not, if you're doing it because you have no other choice, what a horrible position to be in.
You're
What a
really setting
scary position.
yourself up for at at the least just a really uncomfortable, worrisome
Yeah,
experience, and at the worst a really poor outcome because you didn't have the commitment to educate yourself properly. It's yeah, it is really unfortunate when people are put in that position. And one thing that we've talked about before, going back to needing a doctor's recommendation or referral for anything, and especially in a really small area, is that so often women escaped the medical system for a reason. They had a bad experience with a doctor, um, and obstetrical violence is a really well documented thing now, and more women are speaking up. And some of these situations are really horrific. We're really talking about molestation and rape and
yeah,
really significant trauma. And so a woman finds herself pregnant again and she's looking around at her options, and she's trying to get outside of the medical community that harmed her. So she seeks out a midwife, and then she finds herself right back in the hands of her rapist, of the person who caused her so much trauma. And it's unfortunately more likely in a rural setting. At least, let's say that this licensure did come to Nevada and we did have requirements for physician referrals. You might have some options. You might not. There might really only be one or two doctors, even in a giant city where hundreds of thousands of women are having births every month. You might really only have one or two doctors willing to be that physician who will even refer with midwives. And because they're the guys who advertise themselves as a natural birth kind of doctors, women have already tried them. They
mm-hmm.
know they want a natural birth. They think they maybe want to have it in a hospital. They've heard great things about this doctor and they have a terrible experience. So they try to leave that system. And even if they don't have to face him, or even if there aren't those requirements for physician referral, chances are those guys are on the board that
Yeah,
regulates midwives. And
yeah,
so even if these women aren't coming face to face with this, system that harmed them, or even the very person that harmed them, they're there. They're calling the shots from a
yeah.
room far away, not ever even necessarily directly consulting with these women, but their choices are made for them by these same people that they're trying to escape from. And it's really so unfortunate because it just ties everybody's hands. And furthermore, like you said, it creates the sense of I'm not really in charge for
Mm-hmm.
women. They don't really get to make their own choices because sure, they might be signing a piece of paper that said, I'm making this choice. And what they understand they're really saying is somebody somewhere is looking at this. And now, is there going to be backlash? Am I going to be viewed as a negligent parent for making this choice later?
Right. Depending upon your child protective service situation in your
Mhm.
community, you could be charged with medical neglect. It is a
Correct.
serious issue. So yeah, that's a reality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about the situation in your license state. Let's try to end on a more positive note and describe your paradise situation in Nevada when you first began. What was it like?
Wow, it was awesome. It was so awesome. You were
Mhm.
just a child. um, it was anybody could just hang out a shingle, and there were some people who decided they were going to deliver babies who put a yellow actually back in those days you didn't hang out a shingle, you put an ad in the yellow pages. That was
Yes.
proof you'd arrived.
And then,
So
yeah, you're really legitimate if you've got an ad in the yellow
yeah,
pages. Yeah.
yeah. So there, and I'm not going to name names, but there were two that I can think of. One, she had a bunch of her own children and she decided she was going to be a midwife, and I think she's had a long and amazing career. There was another one who things did not turn out so well for her, but were her clients. But she didn't last very long. And there were people that would show up and they'd be over the fringes and then they'd disappear. But for the most part, the people who were devoted to birth, who were serious about it, we would crash doctors' training sessions. We had nobody we had to have continuing education units for. We did it because we wanted to know. And we
Yes.
would go in
Mhm.
and sit through. There was one time it was at a really fancy restaurant. They were talking about pap smears, and they brought around the most awesome caviar and salmon pizza. And Jay and I just gobbled it up. It was so funny. But we had a blast. We had a blast taking care of our people. We had a blast just feeling like we were doing the work we wanted to do.
Mhm.
And there were doctors, and like I said, there may have been a few doctors over the years that acted like jerks, but for the most part, we knew who we could call, and I think it would go the rounds. This doctor, he's really good, and so we kind of all know that doctor would be really good, and then maybe he'd start cooling to us, so we'd find another doctor. But we always seemed to find the medical care that our clients needed, always.
Great.
And in worst case scenario, if they had no money and we couldn't, we didn't know what to do with them, we take them to UMC, which is now no longer called UMC, but that we take them to the hospital there and they'd be seen and no questions asked. Nobody gave us a hard time. It was amazing.
Right.
And the choices we made about the care that we gave the women were choices we made with the women, and the women were able to have the freedom to decide whether or not they wanted to have their blood work done, and almost all of them did, whether or not they wanted to have metabolic screening for their newborn afterwards. Almost all of them did, but nobody was breathing down our necks to try and pressure this woman to make a choice that fit the ideal of what this licensing bureau said. So it was really amazing. It was a really great time. It did matter that I was working with somebody that, we had an awesome time together. We were best friends. So that made a difference. But um, even notwithstanding that, it was just awesome. Few times we went into, more than a few times, but I'm not going to say how many. We went into Arizona, we went into California, we went into Utah. We would fly sometimes when a client had moved away, they would have us come to them. And honest, God, I never even thought, it never even occurred to me, man, I could get in trouble for this. It never even occurred to me because my brain was so wired to this freedom in
Yeah.
Nevada, where you
Hmm.
can just, you can do what you are meant to do. And out of all those midwives, some of whose training was dubious, they all really, I can't think of any of them that didn't truly want what was best for their clients. And so everybody was striving to do what was best. Yeah, sure, there could be some lunatic that comes along, but I'll tell you, word of mouth is a powerful thing.
It
And
really is, especially in such a small community where chances are you heard about home birth first by word
yeah,
of mouth. And so you were plugged into the community before you ever considered home birth for yourself. you already knew a few clients who
Yeah,
had gone to that midwife and heard their experience. And so, were you a part of Nevada Midwives Association? I think that
yeah,
started in 81. Mhm.
yeah,
So that offered some peer review and a sense of accountability and a place for you to, like a safe place where, did you feel safe? Like, we just had this
absolutely,
awful birth and we really need some
absolutely.
support so we can all keep going. And that's so missing with a licensure board, isn't it?
It
It
really
goes
is.
from what can I learn from this? How can I support this family to this is over. My career is over. I'm going to go before this board and they're not going to see it the way that it really went down. Yeah, that my experiences were the same. And speaking with lots of midwives throughout Southern Nevada, when licensure was first being introduced several years ago, um, I mean, when I came on the scene, I understand there's been attempts from various places over the years, but when it came on my radar and I became involved, it seems that in Northern Nevada, the atmosphere is different for particular midwives. They want licensure for the reasons that you were saying it came to Wisconsin, was that it's going to give us this sense of legitimacy with the medical community, and then they'll suddenly respect what we do. Not that they actually
Interestingly,
know anything about midwifery or about the people who choose that kind of care or
right.
what our training is or who our clients are. None of that. We're just going to have this magic piece of paper and transfers are going to be better and we're going to get
Yep.
referrals and all our lab work's going to
Yeah.
be so smooth, because in some states, some midwives do enjoy that kind of relationship. And it was odd for us to hear in Southern Nevada, where the majority of midwives are, just because it's more populous, right? Thinking we don't have those issues. I mean, like you said, you end up with your jerks. Some people have, horrible transfers and they're treated poorly. For the most part, you walk in and you say, I'm a midwife, I'm here with my client, here's what's going on. And they go, all right, let's get started. And it's okay. And part of that, I think, is that we've trained each other in how to interact with the medical community. There's lots of really wonderful doulas here, and that's part of their job, is during the prenatal portion, during the pregnancy, we're spending hours and hours with these clients, helping them think through what might happen if you have to transfer. And in some cases, like you said, you're sending them to a friendly doctor for their lab work or, for an ultrasound. And so that they've already established a relationship. They've had a little bit of experience with the medical community. And so they know how to behave. They know what their rights are. And it makes a huge difference. So this was so natural, like you're saying, it's just a mindset. It's just the way things are. It's organic, it's built on relationships, and people learn it slowly over time, like any other social skill. And so we don't stop to think about how that happened. It was just organic. And
Right.
so we've really had to think that through in communicating with and really it's two or three midwives in Northern Nevada who are publicly saying it's so terrible up here. The atmosphere is just awful, and getting licensure is going to fix all of that. Now, mind you, not all of the midwives in Northern Nevada are saying this. They're
Mhm.
looking around at each other like, I don't have that experience. Do you? Or if they do, they have the mindset that it's their job to fix it, and they're going to find a loophole. They're going to find a way around, like you said. Send them to a place where you do your own labs, or
Mhm.
you know educate your client on how to take the reins in their own care and go seek out what they need, because really they're in charge, right?
Yeah.
So we said this sounds like an education issue. This doesn't sound like a licensure issue. This sounds like maybe the birth community in Northern Nevada could benefit from some education on how to maneuver this environment that you're kind of forced to live in. And they didn't understand. They said, we don't have money for education. I'm thinking, oh, education means something completely different to us
Yeah,
than it
yeah.
does because they've come from a really mainstream model of education, and that was their road into midwifery was a mainstream medicalized model that they want everybody to have in this bill, a meek accreditation. And so that's where they began. They didn't have the chance to develop that kind of organic, um,
Hmm.
social, but it's just this is the way it is. We're all going to develop relationships and kind of teach each other and support each other. So, we're really passionate about helping people gain that, but all of our attention is spent on legislation instead, just
Yeah, yeah,
constantly warding off this interference into this very extremely personal relationship. I hope if you have kids listening with you, here's your warning. um, we're talking about an intensely personal sexual experience. You're literally in your house naked, you know, in what is, by all definitions, a consensual sexual agreement
yeah.
with
Hmm.
very carefully chosen people. And there really should be nobody involved with that decision whatsoever, except
Yeah,
those specific people.
yeah,
And it's just, there's no word for it but gross to
yeah,
say we're going to have
absolutely.
remote people who don't actually have to interface with any of us involved in the decisions. Even right down to the apprentices or assistants, they're mentioned in law. You have to be licensed before you ever attend a single birth
That's,
as
yeah,
an assistant. This
that's how
is
it is in Wisconsin.
insane.
Yep, in Wisconsin, it's the same way. You have to make a declaration that you're a student, and you have to have the experienced licensed midwife sign off that she will oversee you.
No,
I
I
want to
wouldn't
say,
mind that. I would mind it, of course, but our legislation language is such that you can never be present with that mom for 1 minute without the supervision of a midwife. So
well,
what that means is, say that you have attended 10 or 20 births and you know something, more than nothing, right? And you get there first because you live closer, and you're sitting in the driveway and you're on the phone with this mom who is pushing her baby out, and you can't go in
that's
because the
nuts.
midwife is not there yet. She's stuck in traffic or she's at another birth. Or worse, what this means is that we're just going to have less midwives because
Yeah, that is
becoming a
what that
midwife is
means.
so organic, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that is
did
what
you
that
attend
means.
your first birth thinking this is what I want to do the rest of my life?
Nope.
No. And so few of us do, right? You attend as a friend or a photographer, and you kind of, or you just kind of approach a midwife and say, "Can I go to a handful of births with you and just see how that sits?" And you can have the advantage of sitting with that mom for those long, long, boring, slow hours and observe without a midwife around, without,
Yeah.
any
Without somebody
supervision.
trying to educate you, because you're getting an education slowly and
Hmm.
gently by watching. I do want to point out something. Those midwives in Northern Nevada, the midwife who started the education program in Wisconsin is one of the midwives from Northern Nevada. I will not say her name.
Is
And
that
she
right? Hmm.
moved to Wisconsin and she started that program, and she is a huge advocate of licensure. She just thinks it's amazing. So,
Yeah.
there's a ripple effect. The midwives in Northern Nevada, they're affecting the midwives in Southern Nevada, because I'm sure there are, I don't know how many midwives now in Southern Nevada are supporting the idea of being licensed, but they're misguided. They are truly misguided. If you want to be able to, uh, let me back up. If you want to carry drugs, I'm all for there being some sort of a licensure for people who want to be midwives who carry drugs. You want
Right.
to do that? More power to you. Sorry.
What advice do you have for both CPMs and for midwives who took another educational pathway who do not have the CPM? Um, so what advice do you have for those who want licensure or for those who want to remain autonomous? What would you say to those two different groups?
Well, to the ones who want to be licensed, I would say what you think you will gain, you will not. It will cost you money. You will lose certain freedoms in the way you practice. Your clients will lose certain freedoms in the services they can receive. You will not receive what you think you will. It will be a deficit in your life. There is no real advantage to being licensed. There is no advantage, honestly, to being licensed. To people who are CPMs and haven't, like, they aren't committed to being licensed, I don't even know that I can, well, I do know that I cannot embrace NARM or MANAC anymore, not anymore. I sat on boards there. I've volunteered for different things over the years. And the goal is to have every state have licensure.
Yeah.
I cannot
And
support that.
they are very open about that. It's
They are
stated
now.
on the front
For a long
page.
time, they were not. Yeah.
Right. They want it. And I have read the 3-inch thick guidebook put out by NARM to deal with people like me. Here's how you deal with the people who are going to push back against licensure. And it is very manipulative and condescending and insulting in every way.
Yeah,
I
I'll
wish
bet.
that I'd held on to that book, but moving out of state makes you pare things down. But
Yeah.
no, they absolutely have that agenda. They make a lot of money
They
off
make a
of
lot of money,
licensure.
and nearly everybody that works for them is a volunteer. So they're not paying out a lot in payroll.
Mhm.
They've got quite a good setup going there. But be that as it may, they're allowed to do whatever they want. As a CPM, there's no real advantage to having a CPM credential. I felt, for me, when I first got it, that it would make me feel more secure in the knowledge that I felt like I gained. And of course, I passed the test, and then I felt good. But other than that, it was meaningless. It was absolutely meaningless.
Mhm.
And then I used it later to become licensed. But now there is a perceived meaning to it. Now there's real push to say there's those midwives, and then there's CPMs, and over there they're the CNMs. And so that once you start setting yourself aside from any other group of people, it's human nature to think you're better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And whether it's because of color or religion, or in this case we're talking about credentials or non-credentials, as the case may be, that's not a healthy place to be when you have to interface with those people. So I don't recommend getting the CPM at all. There are lots of different ways that you can get educated without having to go through that process. And
Right.
really, there are lots of midwives who would be glad to have somebody eager to learn come and help them at birth. So
Yeah, in my experience, midwives are first and foremost educators, and that's how they
yes.
came to midwifery. But not all of them, for sure. Of midwives that I know who came through it organically, like you said, felt like it was a calling, was something they
Mm-hmm.
were compelled to do no matter what, are already the kind of people who were avidly educating themselves in everything, and
Mm-hmm.
and are the obnoxious people at the grocery store who want to educate the person in line in front of them and the person behind them on everything. And they're good at it. They're really good at it. And those tend to be the kind of clients you get too.
Yeah.
People find midwifery care because they're already self-educators. And so they're not asking the questions when they have an interview with a midwife. Rarely, practically never, in fact, maybe never, did I ever hear, what are your credentials? What is your certification? What did that mean? It was
Yeah.
more, how many births have you attended? Can you give me the names of 5 people who you've attended? What would you do in case of placenta abruption? They know their
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And for
That's a
those
really
who
good
don't,
point.
then those midwives, a good one, and in my experience, most midwives, they're helping their client educate themselves
Right.
so that they can weed out clients who are not going to be a good fit. In no
So
case did I know somebody who pretended to be something they were not.
yeah, you make a
They were
good
not
point.
saying, "Oh, I have a nursing degree" or something like that, you know.
So when you say that the people were well educated that you dealt with, and that was my experience in Nevada too. Those people had their various reasons for choosing home birth with a midwife. It might be because they had religious beliefs, you know, and took care of a lot of people that were polygamous, or
Right,
it
right.
might be
Hmm.
because they were really into natural things. They wanted to do this naturally.
Never
So
was it somebody being nefarious and trying to present
so
herself as something she was not.
So very, very seldom was it somebody that had something nefarious about their lifestyle or their life that they wanted to hide. But what I found in Wisconsin and what I hear about the home birth community in Missouri is that there's a different mindset. It has changed the culture around birth to the degree that the women choose home birth. Okay, so the Amish women, they choose home birth for the same reasons that people choose home birth in Nevada.
Hmm.
You know, wide
Hmm.
variety of reasons, but mainly because they want to have this experience and money. Um, but and also they can't drive, so
Yeah.
you'll drive to me. But there were a lot of people who didn't want to have their blood work taken because they didn't want to have a drug test. They nobody ever asked me how much experience do you have. Never in Wisconsin. Never. Nobody ever
Hmm.
asked me that. Nobody ever asked me about credentials for sure, and I usually bring it up, just going over my experience and stuff. Because when I'd say, "Do you have any questions?" They'd say no, and so I'd say, "Well, here are the questions you should have asked." And I'd bring out my questions, and I'd say the question, and then I'd answer it because
Hmm.
they should know
They
those
should
things,
know. The
and they
last
should.
thing you want is to be in the middle of your birth or at 38 weeks and find that you two actually do not click at all. That's a
Yeah,
terrible position to be in for both of
yeah,
you.
it is.
Yeah.
It's awful. So I do think that having uh, a more organic midwife community leads to those sorts of people being attracted to it rather
Mhm.
than people who are being attracted to midwives because hey, it won't cost me very much and no one's going to check and see that I did math, and or you know,
Mhm.
they won't be judging my the condition my kids are in or whatever. I just think it changes the way that relationship works. I think it totally changes it.
It does. And furthermore, uh, because, like you said, your job is to create an atmosphere of safety, right? We go into a relationship that way, and many midwives that I know, I mean, more times than I could count sitting here. It would take me a long time to count them all and share the details. A midwife will encounter those clients who do have something that's potentially worrisome, and they have a safe person to tell.
Exactly.
And you can give them support and recovery. You can walk into a house that nobody should live in.
Yeah.
And because you have a safe relationship with that person already, you can say, "You're about to be a mom and you need help to get your dishes done every day. And I
Yep.
know some people who can help you. Learn how to keep your house clean. You've got 8 weeks until your baby comes. And I, as your friend and as your midwife, really need to see your house cleaner."
Yep.
Rather than, I'm going to report you to CPS, you're going to have police on your doorstep, and now you're not going to feel safe anymore. Or something does come up in your blood work, and now you have a safe person who can help you find support
Right.
to overcome your problem. And they do. And it
Yep.
changes their entire life because they know they're safe. Their secrets are safe with you. And the response when you find a problem is not, "I'm going to call the police with the guns to take your kids away." It's, I'm going to find 10 people and we're going to come over and we're going to support you and we're going to be your friends for the rest of your life. You just don't get that in an atmosphere where you are required to report people's problems, their private
Yeah.
problems. So we spent an awful long time on here. I don't know how much longer we want to go. I mean, we could talk for 10 hours probably.
I'm sure you've heard the tests that have been done that even by observing something, you change the
You
outcome.
change it. Mm-hmm.
So just by virtue of being licensed, I think fundamentally changes a midwife. I think she is fundamentally changed and her interactions with her clients change, and she cannot help it. She probably is completely unaware of it. I hope to God I did not do that. I hope I was who I am always. But I suspect that that's not the case. And those things you just pointed out, I don't think they become an option, because if you're a licensed midwife, you don't do those things.
Right.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that might be something that would go on in someone's mind.
Yeah.
A licensed midwife. Doctor wouldn't do that. Why would I do that? A doctor would call CPS. So I just want to recap. There were no advantages to me as having a license. None. There were no advantages as a midwife being licensed, not at all. There were no advantages to me as compared to being unregulated. Right. Let me make that clear. There were no advantages to the clients to have a licensed midwife that I could see at all. There were no advantages to the medical community at all having midwives that were licensed in their midst. I see no advantages whatsoever. I believe that the amount of money that the state took in was probably pretty minimal. The amount of money that school takes in training those midwives, that's probably pretty significant. But other than that, there's no advantage to it. It's a fairy tale that you're going to gain legitimacy and recognition.
Agreed. I hope that we can maintain our freedoms a little bit longer. We may have to do this every 2 years, but that's okay. It's worth it. Well, thank you. I hope you'll move back to Nevada, because Nevada is missing another fantastic midwife with you being so far away.
I'm done catching babies.
Oh, yeah, I've tried saying that a few times. Thank you for spending so long with us today. Oh, what is it?
My podcast is called Midwife Talks. And if you go to wisconsinbirth.com/links, all the links to all the platforms it's on is on there. And I actually did an episode just recently called The Secret Ways Women Are Sabotaging Their Midwife. And it talks about people taking responsibility for their own decisions. So anyway, it's something fun that I do. And there's contact information on that page also.
Fantastic. I will definitely check that out. Well, thank you. Thank you for spending so much time with us, and have a fantastic day.
You too. Talk to you later.